This is my third year here at Mad City Vegan Festival. It's really great to see how this festival is taking shape. This year is bigger and better than ever before. And I'd just like to thank the people that organize this festival because they do an amazing job. Just a handful of people. So my name is Robert Grillo, and I'm the founder and director of Free From Harm, which is a nonprofit dedicated to farm animal rescue, education, and advocacy. And I'm here today with a presentation that I call Fictions, Facts, and Food Choices. And it's based on the idea that we often tell ourselves we are what we eat. And that sounds good to us. We often use the expression and we often hear it. We are what we eat. But we rarely, if ever, consider the powerful forces that shape our food choices. And that's what this presentation is all about. So I'd like to just start out by telling you a little bit about my background in the what I call image building industry. And image building is advertising and marketing and media, journalism, TV, radio, all of that stuff combined. That's what I mean by image building. I started out as a graphic designer and marketing person working for different agencies around Chicago. And at one point, I was working on some giant food industry accounts where we were designing Happy Meal packages, of all things. So, you know, when I'm working on this stuff years ago, I never saw the problem with portraying happy animals on a package containing the body parts of an animal that most likely lived a miserable life. And it never occurred to me to think that what kind of message or mixed message we were sending children. And God forbid, if children knew the truth about where this food came from, they would be traumatized. Well, for me, about 6 years ago, my shift to animal advocacy started when I adopted these three little ones. And I didn't make a real studied decision about this. I just decided that I was going to adopt them from this chick hatching program. So I grabbed 3 of them and brought them home, and I taught myself how to raise them. And they bonded with me immediately, and I with them. They became part of our family. We just didn't see them as chickens, we just saw them as companions, as animals that kind of follow you around the house and want to, you know, take a nap in your lap while you watch TV and, you know, all the things that dogs and cats and other animals do. And an interesting thing happened during this experience. I started to realize that most of what I had been taught about chickens and other farmed animals was dead wrong. And through firsthand, real-world experiences of raising these animals, that I was learning all kinds of interesting and new things from them. I was learning about myself in them, and I was learning about our relationship with all animals, including the human ones. And I think this is so important, this contrast between the old reality, what I call the old reality, which is the world you and I were taught to believe, the world of popular culture that says these animals have a purpose and that's it. And it's a world that stifles critical thinking. And the contrast between that world and what I call the new reality, which is when you learn firsthand what these animals are really like. And I think this is so important because I think it really gets at the source of many of our most serious conflicts today, not only with animals, but also with other human groups and with our environmental problems and other social problems such as poverty. It's all based on this idea of us and them rather than us as one. So I'd like to start out usually by asking my audience a question which is kind of rhetorical. You don't have to answer it, but I'd like you to at least think about it. And the question might seem odd, but the question is, were you taught not to care? And what I mean is, when you were a child, were you confused by the fact that you were taken to a petting zoo or some other zoo where there were farmed animals, and you were told to treat them with kindness and respect? or you were taken to a wildlife preserve, or any other kind of place where you would be in contact with animals, and you were taught to treat them with respect. But then you might go home and your parents or your friends' parents might serve you animal products. And some children, at least I know I was, we question why this is. And from the adult world, the message we get from the adult world is some variation on not caring. In other words, well, honey, it's just part of the natural cycle, the natural process. Or it's just the way things are. Or that's what they're here for. Or, it's time to grow up, or toughen up, something of that kind of effect. So, were you taught not to care at some point? Did you get that message from the adult world? In fact, our culture conditions us to ignore the one daily decision that has by far the greatest impact, and that's our food choices. To illustrate this point, consider the fact that of all of the animals that are exploited or used for some human purpose, almost 100% of them are farmed animals. In fact, 99.7%. You could argue a little bit, margin of error, maybe 1%, are farmed animals. And the rest are all the other types of animal uses, from zoos to animal testing in laboratories, to hunting and circuses, clothing, education, et cetera, et cetera. The question that's that's challenged me and that I've struggled with for many years is, how can this conditioning work so well on so many of us and for so long? And I like to bring in this film, The Matrix, at this point, because The Matrix is a message, a story, if you will, from popular culture, which is very different from most of the other stories we hear from popular culture, because it actually asks us to question what we've been taught. It asks us to think critically about what we've been taught, instead of just accepting things at face value. The central theme in The Matrix is an ultimatum between the blue pill, the red pill, and the blue pill. The red pill representing truth and the blue pill representing fiction. Now, this theme is very central to the subject, because the fact is that most of us take the blue pill instead of the red pill. We choose fictions over facts. And taking the blue pill serves two very important functions. For one thing, it tells us what we want to hear, and it shows us what we want to see. We want to know that farmed animals are happy or suffering minimally, at least for the short time that they're allowed to stay alive. And they don't know what's coming, they don't know what's going to happen to them, and they don't suffer. We want to believe that. The second important function that taking the blue pill has is it advances the agenda of the animal exploitation industries by presenting animals as willing participants in whatever it is we'd like to do with them. And one of the key strategies that popular culture uses to get this message out is storytelling. Storytelling is the art and science of persuasion. It goes back to ancient times. Even before we had written language, we had oral storytelling that was passed down from generation to generation. And it still remains today the most powerful tool of persuasion that we have. And when you combine it with all the information technologies we have today, like the internet and digital signage and email and texting, you combine all of these different information technologies and you have an even more powerful tool. So storytelling is key. In exploring this subject of how storytelling and culture and power intersect, I came across a really interesting thinker named Antonio Gramsci. Now, Gramsci lived during Mussolini's age. during fascism. In fact, he was the leading anti-fascist intellectual at the time, and Mussolini imprisoned him. While he was in prison, he did not languish in a prison cell. He actually wrote thousands of pages of manuscript, which would later become some of the most important work on political theory and strategy that would see Europe out of fascism. And for our purposes, there's just one idea that he introduced that's called cultural hegemony. And cultural hegemony, according to Gramsci, is the domination and manipulation of a society's norms, habits, customs, values, and beliefs through propaganda, through storytelling and fiction telling. And it's the stories that promote the dominant class's worldview. It's kind of what we call today popular culture. Let me give you an example of, in Gramsci's time, what would be an example of fiction telling or storytelling? Well, during fascist times, they used terminology like euthanasia or mercy killing. They created a whole program called Euthanasia that was about killing people humanely. So they were famous for staging situations like this for the press. Healthy and well-dressed and well-fed, clean Jewish and Roma children singing patriotic songs to the press. And of course, this is what they wanted the world to see. It wasn't really what was happening, was it? What was really happening, of course, was a mass extermination and the gassing of millions of healthy children and adults as well. But this was promoted as a humane solution to the problem. Now, there's a striking parallel today in animal agriculture's use of humane washing. In fact, they present feel-good images of farmers and animals like this one. And they tell us feel-good fantasies and fictions about happy animals who are happy about being exploited for their milk or their eggs or their bodies. And they're happy to go to their deaths to make the sacrifice for us. But in reality, these animals are babies, for the most part. Their lives are cut drastically and violently short in their infant or adolescent age. Not out of necessity, but because some people make a living off of doing this. So, in the fascist example and the animal agriculture example that I gave you, things these two have in common, let me just recap. They both use propaganda successfully to conceal systematic violence against an oppressed group, an inferior group, who are sacrificed in the name of a superior group. And they both use cultural hegemony, what Gramsci calls cultural hegemony. And it is disempowered when society's collective silence and denial and defensiveness is overcome and the truth comes out. In another way, you could say when truth prevails over fictions, justice prevails over injustice. Let's take a moment to consider just how powerful these influences are in our lives. Let's look at Cargill, one of the largest food industry, meat industry entities in the world. Cargill alone spent $1,792 million just on promoting animal products to consumers in 2012. Now, let me just clarify, this is not their profit for the year. This is just their budget for like advertising their products in 1 year. What I'd like to do is take you through some concrete, very common examples of the types of fictions and fictional devices that the animal agriculture uses. But before we do that, I'd just like to look at a few things that we know about animals, and specifically farm animals. Well, for one thing, a couple of years ago, the University of Cambridge came out with what they call the Declaration of Animal Consciousness, which was signed by over 420 of the leading neuroscientists, the leading world animal behaviorists, And it basically said that all mammals, all birds, and all fish, and even some non-vertebrates, are sentient in a common way, and that they're conscious and self-aware. And we know, of course, that animals have to be equipped with fairly complex minds in order to navigate their way through a life in a complex ecosystem. Farm animals are no different because they evolved from an ecosystem too. And living in an ecosystem and living in a natural environment means you have to find a mate, and it means you have to build shelters, and you have to give birth, and you have to find food for your family and store the food, and you have to raise and educate your young, and you have to negotiate and communicate with others in a large, complex social group, like a flock or a herd. And you learn from past experiences. You learn things that are going to hurt or harm you, and you learn to correct those in the future. And you anticipate future events. And you find likes. Each individual has likes and dislikes, and pains and pleasures, loves and losses. Specifically, chickens are self-aware. In other words, they recognize themselves as individuals, and they see other individuals in their flock, in the order, and understand that each one of those has a specific role in the flock. We know now that fish are as sentient as mammals and birds. And they have the same brain hardwiring. They have a limbic system just like we do. It's a smaller size, but it's based on the same kind of limbic system where emotions and pain and suffering are expressed. We know from a famous University of Chicago study that rats express empathy and that they try to free their cage mates. When one is trapped, the other tries to free the other rat. And in one case, it took him a week to figure out how he could free the other rat from this tinier cage that he was in. And he was tricked because the researchers put tricks and food out so that he would maybe kind of like show some self-interest and maybe get distracted away from helping the other rat, but he didn't. And every time they just kept pursuing and trying to get the other rat out. So clear signs of altruism and empathy. And just as a general matter, we know from the age of Darwin on that the science of evolutionary biology shows that we have a common ancestry with all animals. It's not a situation of us and them, but of a continuum, that there will be another species after Homo sapiens. We are not the end of the line. So, on to some of these fictional devices and fictions that we will commonly see in the grocery store or when we're shopping or anywhere else. One of the big ones is consent. And what I mean is, animals are portrayed as willing participants in whatever it is that we'd like to do with them. Such as in this depiction of Krishna milking a sacred cow. Looks so benevolent, and the animal looks so consensual. Or in this modern day version of consent, showing a lovely scene of family farmers with their cows on the packaging of Organic Valley milk. Let's take a little closer look at this interesting theme that runs from ancient times all the way through to modern times, this idea of consent. Because not only are we portraying animals as consensual, but we are also portraying ourselves as their benevolent masters. And we define their very existence as how useful they are to us. And our language affirms this. We never say we take their milk, we never say we take their eggs, or we take their lives, or take their bodies. We always say that they give this to us. So language plays an extremely important role here. Because taking is wrong. In all cultures of the world, stealing is considered immoral. Invisibility is the next one. And what I mean is that we rarely, if ever, see farm animals. Those animals that are being misrepresented by popular culture. They're conveniently hidden away from us. In fact, consider that to every 1 American, there are 32 farm animals, approximately, being raised for food at any given time. And as social psychologist Melanie Joy points out in her book, the main defense mechanism of carnism is denial, which is expressed largely through invisibility. For instance, 1.2 billion farm animals are slaughtered globally every week. But how many of these animals have you seen? Where are they? Anonymity. And what I mean is that when we do see farm animals, they're portrayed as nameless, faceless, generic, and lacking any differentiating qualities, such as in this poster or store sign from Ben & Jerry's. Objectification. I mean, turning animal victims into objects. Look at the striking visual comparison between a bottle cap opener and the piece of machinery that is used to burn or cut the sensitive beak off of a newborn chick. Activist and author Karen Davis has a wonderful quote in relation to objectification. She writes, "If you want to hurt someone and maintain a clear conscience about it, chances are you will invoke arguments along one or more of these lines. The victim doesn't feel, doesn't know, doesn't care, is complicit, or isn't even there." Commodification. In the case of these chicks that I took a photo of in a California farmer's market, there was a $2 price tag over their head. Imagine, we put a price tag on an animal's life that is about equivalent or less than the price of a tube of toothpaste. Think about that for a moment. And let's take a look at what we know about chicks because they're fascinating and precocious learners. Chicks are keenly self-aware, and in fact, they have cognitive skills that don't develop in humans until toddler age. They have a basic understanding of arithmetic and geometry and physics, and they are seeking, right out of the shell, they are seeking to imprint on their mothers. There is absolutely no reason for us to think that they are any different from any other bird that is born and needs its mother right away. But we don't let them have their mothers today. We raise them in artificial incubators, even on the most humane farms. They come from hatcheries where they're raised in artificial incubators by the thousands. And of course, for every female that you see for sale at this farmer's market, there's a male. They can't control the ratio of males and females that are born. And the males are killed at birth at the hatcheries. So let's move on. Let's talk about innovation as a fictional device. When we genetically manipulate animals and selectively breed them for certain traits, we call it an innovation, an advancement, great technology. Like in the case of dairy cows, where we've now engineered them to produce up to 12 times more milk than their bodies were designed for, than their bodies need to feed one calf, which is how much they have at one time. Or in the case of egg-laying hens, hens that are bred for egg-laying. We've engineered them to produce 250 to 300 eggs in their lifetime. Under normal circumstances, without any of this manipulation, they would just lay 10 to 15 eggs a year, a few clutches of eggs, which is true of any wild birds for the most part. And euphemism. We talked a little bit about language before. Forcible impregnation of female animals, called insemination, quote unquote insemination. Well, I call this the mother of all euphemisms because artificial insemination is a process that is elective in humans. Women that want that are having a hard time getting pregnant and they want to be pregnant might consider artificial insemination as a, something to elect for. But in the case of dairy cows, oh no. They are confined and constrained in what the industry calls a rape rack. And then the farm worker shoves an arm up the cow's rectum, excuse the language, but shoves an arm up the rectum, and then with the other shoots a semen gun into her vagina, and so that the semen can be positioned in her cervix. And this is done repeatedly throughout the cow's life until she can't produce milk anymore. Now let's think about this for a moment, right? Since if this was done to any other animal, we would rightfully call it rape or sexual violation or bestiality if it was done to a dog or a cat or some other animal. But in animal agriculture, the law makes an exception and claims that it's allowable because there's an economic interest involved. But can you imagine if it was so easy to justify doing what we wanted to do to someone just because we have an economic interest involved? That's basically the logic behind animal agriculture and its use of animals. And what about family as a fictional device? Look at this package from Domino's Pizza. In this case, we're misled to believe that animals are loved and cared for, like their own family, like their own children. And the Domino's pizza container, they name the cows and they give them names as if to suggest we're stupid enough to think that, oh, yeah, the cheese from this pizza was actually given gracefully by these 5 females. But the fact is that calves, they only exist because their mothers had to be made pregnant so they would lactate and produce milk. They're not wanted. They're just the byproduct of dairy farming. Thank you. And calves are denied the one thing that they need most, their mother, the mother's milk, their mother's nurturing and love, which they would have for the first 12 months of their life under normal circumstances. They are instead stolen from their mothers at birth, and they're sold to an auction house or somewhere where they can be sold for veal. In a few weeks or a few months, they'll be slaughtered for veal or cheap meat. And similar to the innovation one that I said earlier, I had to throw this in there because this is so interesting. This is a postcard from the Chicago Union Stockyards, which at the turn of the century became the largest meatpacking and slaughter system in the world. It was the largest in the world. And this was a postcard that showed up at all of the travel agencies. It was a tourist attraction. You could come to Chicago, to the hog butcher of the world, and you could visit a huge complex like this and see animals being consciously slaughtered. So this fiction tells us that exploiting and killing millions of animals for food is a great achievement of the Industrial Revolution. And then there's Strength and Unity, another fiction. In this case, a series of posters that was produced by the dairy industry and the US government to promote milk consumption after World War II, when the animal agriculture industry was really hurting and they needed a boost. So the USDA came in and helped them out. This type of fiction portrays animal products as the source of our strength and our unity, and a melting pot, apparently. Denigration. This is a device that uses animal words as a source of insult or ridicule. This is a photo still from the film Rebel Without a Cause. Perfect timing. Thank you. I'm thinking about James Dean, and I forgot the name of the film. In this pinnacle scene of the film, his classmates taunt him for not wanting to participate in this ridiculous game where you risk your life and you run a car off the cliff, right? And they're taunting him. They're calling him a chicken. This whole chicken coward thing is something that's so pervasive in our culture, right? We hear it all the time. And I'd like to take a little closer look at this whole chicken coward complex. I think it's worth looking at. Because if you study chickens in their natural habitat, or even some domestic chickens, what you find is that they're incredibly successful at thwarting predators. They have a social network that everyone has different roles at protecting the flock, and they're very sophisticated in the way they protect themselves. They're a very successful species because they've existed for millions of years, and they can be traced back to the Jurassic period. And they lived for thousands of years in a rainforest, a tropical rainforest habitat, until we domesticated them, until we captured them and started using them for our own purposes. Now, mother hens will risk their lives for their chicks if they're in danger. Not really cowardice, is it? Certain males and females that are more like alpha, the more dominant ones, will use themselves as decoys. In other words, if they sense a predator threat, they'll use themselves as decoys to get the predator's attention so the others have a chance to escape. So they're using, there's certain ones that are incredibly brave that see the benefit of the flock over even their own lives. Not wasting. This is another fiction. And what I mean is using the issue of wasting as an ethical ploy to suggest that our moral obligation to animals is met by not wasting any part of their body. So like in this New York Times piece and photo essay, which is styled after a famous Norman Rockwell painting of a Thanksgiving dinner with the turkey in the center and all the family around, this is a good example. But let's look at this issue of wasting and not wasting. Is it really an issue of wasting, or is it an issue of cultural indoctrination? Well, first of all, if it was really an issue of wasting, we would not be wasting all of these plant crops to feed animals. We would be feeding hungry people if we really cared about not wasting. The other thing is, this logic of not wasting means that we should eat all dead bodies, not just certain ones. But the fact is, our culture conditions us to see only certain animal species, basically chickens, cows, turkeys, and pigs, as edible, while everyone else is disgusting and inedible to eat. So I argue that no, this is not an issue of wasting, it's an issue of cultural conditioning. And humane washing as a fictional device. How many of you seen the film Temple Grandin, the HBO film? Humane washing is about putting a humane face on an industry that needlessly kills 10 billion animals just in the US alone. Now, this film portrays Grandin as a kind of Mother Teresa of farm animals, right? But the fact is, outside of this film, she's an industry insider. She is paid by leading animal agriculture trade industry groups like the American Meat Institute and the National Turkey Federation. She shows up in their videos. She shows up in their literature. She's the key line speaker at their conferences on humane handling and care of animals. She's not on the outside. She's inside of the system. And heroism, kind of a strange one, but you'll see this pop up sometimes. Portraying animal victims as false heroes, like in the Smithsonian piece that was out a couple of years ago, called How the Chicken Conquered the World. And misogyny, asserting male superiority and reinforcing the submissive, servile role of the female animal as a baby maker, or a milk producer, or an egg machine. This is a trade ad for a pharmaceutical product that helps cows produce more milk, right? And the headline reads, if she can't stay pregnant, what else will she do? It's almost like saying, well, at one point in our history, it was acceptable to say, well, she belongs home barefoot and pregnant. This is kind of applying that same mentality to females of other species. The fact is, this is a male-dominated industry, the dairy and animal agriculture in general, and they need to exert total control over females, over female reproduction, over their ovaries and their mammary glands, and their offspring, and ultimately, their lives. How about masculinity used as a fictional device to sell animal products? It suggests that eating animals also feeds our ego. It makes us feel more powerful, more in control, more confident. Like in the cover of this Phoenix magazine of a good-looking young chef with a pig thrown over his shoulders. And naturalism as a fiction. Naturalism, in this case, appealing to our yearning for maternal care and affection and love. Like in this Got Milk ad, where it is basically promoting the idea that milk is as natural, drinking breast milk from cows is as natural as breastfeeding your own baby. But even calves are weaned off of their mother's milk after a year, and they move on to solid food. We're the only species that continues to drink the milk of another species into adulthood, even though the idea of drinking our human milk would be considered disgusting. It really is cultural conditioning. The next one is sexualization. Sexualizing animal products and using sex to sell animal products makes them more consumable. I'm not using a very typical example like you'd see on a TV commercial. I'm actually picking one that's actually pretty weird and atypical just to kind of prove a point. Because this is from a progressive farming magazine called Modern Farmer, online and in print. You'll see it at Whole Foods for the hipster type, farmer people. Oh, probably, yeah. This feature story and photo essay, which has a whole series of photos, is entitled Painting the Farm Red, the Chicken Slaughtering Pinup Girls of Marion County. And here is one of the pictures from the photo series of actual chickens being slaughtered by a woman who's all dressed gussied up. And I just want to read you the intro to the piece. It reads, at Marion Acres, we thoughtfully raise chickens on pasture to provide our customers with healthy and well-cared-for meat. Once a year, friends and family of Marion Acres gather up all the girls to do what we like to call our ladies' chicken harvest. All the ladies get dressed up in vintage clothes, pin-up-inspired hair, and of course, red lipstick, to do our butchering. We couldn't think of a better way to knock them dead. Trivialization as a fiction. This is a picture I took of a recent picture of a sign on the side of a smokehouse type restaurant. And what I mean is turning animals into a laughingstock so that we can sabotage any serious consideration of the suffering that we may cause them. If we can laugh at them, then we don't have to take them seriously. And glorification, one of my last ones here. And this is about turning farmers into something almost of a deity, of a messiah. In this case, a good shepherd, like Jesus Christ. And this comes from the very progressive Whole Foods market, who has a vegan, leader. But it plays into this, what we want to believe is a proud and noble tradition of animal husbandry. Reductionism. And what I mean is a fiction that misleads us into believing that a complex problem is, a complex problem is a simple one with a simple solution. Like cage-free. Throw that word out and everything's fine. Or pasture-raised. But you know what's really interesting? Chickens do not originate on pasture. They are not happy on pasture. They like trees, they like shelter. They come from the tropical rainforest. They are stressed out by wide open spaces where they are vulnerable to predators. So they don't feel comfortable on pasture. They like trees and they like shrubs, places to hide and dust bathe and sunbathe. Authenticity. Everybody knows the real dairy logo, right? It's been around for decades. The authenticity fiction suggests that animal products are real, and anything that's plant-based is just a fake. The fact is, the process of breeding, raising, and killing animals today could not be more unreal and more artificial. This is my last one. Sorry for the difficult image, but it's kind of necessary to prove the point. Here's a class on how you can butcher chickens humanely, okay? So the idea here in the visibility fiction is that by witnessing or even partaking in violence against animals, it makes us more courageous. At least we know where our food comes from, and we know how the animal suffers. It makes us more conscious or aware. Or it even makes the act itself more ethical. The chicken appreciates the fact that we have a conscience. But let's be real. The fact is that if we were to put a cat or a dog in the position of that chicken and hoist him upside down by his legs and slash the poor animal's throat, the fact that we witnessed or participated in this wouldn't make it more ethical, right? We're just kind of discriminating against species here. Okay, so those are my examples, and I'd like to just leave you with a kind of, what do you do with this kind of information thing, right? So you know maybe something more about how powerful fictions are and how they're used to manipulate our food choices. So what do we do about this? And I say the best thing we can do is to not be silent about it and to find these examples, identify them, and share them. Have other people become aware of how they're being manipulated. Because this is how social movements take shape. They take shape when we're not silent and when we break through the silence and denial and we expose the fictions that lie, that conceal a violent practice. So I'll close by just giving you an example of how you might do this. In my case, I came across this product in a children's store. And it's about throwing chickens around the house and teaching kids, how fun that is. It was kind of disturbing. So, and this is like one of those high-end kind of boutique places. It's not a Walmart. And so what I did is I sent the manufacturer a letter, and I also sent the store a letter, and I asked them, I sent them this picture, and I sent them this photo, which is a photo of two of our rescues, Danita and Sweet Pea. And I asked them two questions in this email. I said, which of these two images do you think represents a damaging fiction about animals? And which do you think represents a truthful image of animals? And if you do choose the latter, my second question to them was, don't you feel that we owe it to children to tell them the truth about animals? So that's just one example of how we can do something with this information. Thank you very much. I will take questions outside in case the other speaker coming after me has the time to set up. Thank you very much.